ToolCASE, the retail banking industry's preferred choice for real-time risk management and fraud detection.
This is your host, Sam Piccolotti with ToolCASE FraudCAST, and we're coming to you today with another episode. And my co-host, Brett Johnson, responsible for refining the modern financial crime as we know it today. After being placed on the United States Most Wanted list, captured, convicted of 39 felonies, Brett promptly escaped prison. Captured again, Brett served his time, accepted responsibility, and found redemption through his loved ones and the help of the FBI. Today he's considered a leading authority on internet crime, identity theft, and cybersecurity. Speaks, consults across the planet to help protect those and organizations from the type of person he used to be. We're glad to have him on our side, and always a pleasure. Thanks for joining me again today, Brett. How are you doing?
Sam, I am doing great, and I am still jealous of that miraculous beard that you have on your face.
All right. I think you might be in the minority of others, but I will take it. Thank you. Before we introduce our guest, I think you've got another in-house guest there. Do you want to introduce that one?
I've got a couple. So, I redid my office. I have all these little toys going around. So I've got Alex DeLarge. And we've got little Psycho Bunny. He's just done some bad things. That's right. That's what we got.
Well, they're new to the show, and we're glad to have them. So
I'm sure they'll make more appearances.
I'm guessing they will. Welcome, and super excited to have a guest and a very well respected and endeared ToolCASE client, Eveline Tenczar of Launch Federal Credit Union in Florida. Eveline's been in the banking industry for over 25 years. Started, as many have, on the teller line, worked her way up into management, and has worked in a variety of different positions throughout the organization. And I remember back in 2015 when Eveline took the step and jumped into the fraud and BSA world. And I think that both her prior institution and I know for sure your current institution is really glad that you made that step and that leap. From there, things have really taken off. She's a certified BSA officer, an NCBSO, BSACS, and AML certified expert, and really thrilled to have her as a guest today. We're gonna get into some conversations. It's great to be able to have both perspectives for the listeners today. Brett Johnson being out on the cybercrime, and of course his many years spent on the other side of the criminal system. And Eveline's.
I like the way you tried to put it really nicely there.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going, you introduced Eveline, and I'm sitting there going, wow, there's not enough letters in the alphabet to get all those initials she's got.
Well, hey.
we're gonna have to get you some initials. But
there you go.
I think it's going to be great to listen to some of the perspective that Eveline can share today. What's happening in the trenches? Eveline, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, Sam and Brett. Good to see you again.
Eveline, it's great to see you. It truly is. I remember the last time I saw you, I pulled your information up on the dark web.
Yes, you did. Mine and a few of my children's. I was quite shocked. I was a little surprised to see that.
Yeah. Well, that's what you get for volunteering, because I know you had volunteered yourself for that exercise. Anyway, tell us a little bit about your current position today, what you're doing for the credit union, and then we'll talk about some of the experiences you're having with fraud.
So I'm currently the BSA officer and the fraud manager. Well, in fraud, as we all know it, with COVID, it kind of went a little haywire. Seeing things, especially at this institution I'm at, a little smaller, seeing things we'd never seen before. With COVID, I think everybody is just trying something new. So it's just kind of gone a little crazy with the fraud out there. So we're learning new things every day and how these individuals work, and they're always 10 steps ahead of us, though. So it's really just trying to stay up and up on what's going on.
You were involved recently in a lot of activity around the PPP loan fraud. Would you mind talking about that a little bit and what you discovered, and of course, if there was a role that ToolCASE and our technology played, please share with the listeners how that all went down.
Sure. So the PPP loan, I think the first thing that triggered it was when we saw a 16-year-old get a loan. You know, we know that you're 16, you may have a business, but you know, there's a math to the magic number of the 20,833. There's an equation there to get to that number. When you see that, it's kind of an eye opener. So here in the state of Florida, it's easy to find whether you own a business or not, right? You can identify that. And what we were seeing was that all of a sudden you had a lot of people that had new businesses, types of businesses that were not registered with the state of Florida, or, you know, when you looked at accounts, you kind of thought, well, hey, there's not even any payroll going in there, much less business functions going, you know, business transactions going through these accounts. And then when you started having an open conversation with these people that were getting these loans, it was just quite interesting, the things you were hearing. The one thing that was easy to identify is that they were applying for these loans with the institutions were out of state, and primarily because those institutions can identify whether that person really and truly had a business here in the state of Florida. So they just took the information they provided and they approved loans left and right. One of our biggest, largest amounts that we sent back for the 1 month was 1.2 million we sent back in fraudulent PPP loans. So when you think of an institution our size, that's quite a bit of money in 1 month to go back.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. I mean, you know, I think you when you start seeing the Cash App transactions, and that's where, when we talk about ToolCASE, that's where we identified it really. We started seeing an increase with Cash App transactions. We have a rule in place for Cash App. So we started seeing Cash App, and I'm going, well, gosh, what's the source of funds? You know, and anybody working in fraud knows that you want to identify your source of funds. So we started seeing the PPP loans, and I'm going, this person's never even had a job in their life. How do they have a business that they made $100,000 the year before? It just made no sense. So we started doing some digging and reached out to some contacts, and that's where Secret Service has been great, you know, because I've reached out to them and they've really assisted me with that. And then my contacts at SBA. So it took off. I mean, for an institution our size, the amount of SBA loans that were fraudulent was a lot. Not to mention that if you were a legit business, we offered those loans. Why wouldn't you just apply through us? You know, why were you going out of state?
Well, you know why.
You know, yeah, exactly. So,
and
let me tell you.
To your point, I mean, so, you know, I monitor Telegram, monitor the dark web, everything else, and there's a list of banks or institutions where fraudsters were supposed to hit. Hey, they don't check anything. It flies through easy. Try this, and this is how you answer the questions. It'll go through just fine. And I'm sure some of those institutions are the ones you're talking about.
Yes. I'm sure. The interesting thing was that when you started asking them what types of business they had, because I had conversations with each one of these individuals that received these loans, and you started asking them what type of business, it was like they had to think about it, you know? So you knew right off the bat, well, if you're having to think about what kind of business, and you start kind of asking your questions in a, you know, well, why did you all of a sudden Cash App you received the deposit and Cash App $2,500. Who did you pay out, you know, for the information? We had an individual that even put it out there on GoFundMe that she needed to pay this back, you know? So can you help me raise the money to pay this PPP loan back? Because Secret Service knocked on my door. It was yeah, that was interesting. So, and then
Brett, did you not try that tactic yourself?
Hey, you know, I think I've told you, Sam, you know, with me with COVID, it was March of last year. And, you know, I do very well when the world is turned on. You know, I do consulting, I do speaking, I've got podcasts, TV shows, you know, episodes, everything else. And March of last year, COVID hits, pandemic's there, and I'm sitting there going, and I set my family down. And I don't think I've told you this, Eveline, but I set my family down, and, you know, I told them, I was like, hey, I don't expect to do any speaking. I think all the consulting is going to be canceled. The way the story ends is with Brett Johnson back breaking the law and in prison for 20 years. And fortunately, what happened is me just vocalizing that. I told my family, I told my friends, I told FBI people I work with, everything else, and they kind of took me in under their wing, constantly checked on me, made sure I was all right. And it was that support network that really helped. And at the same time, we had our mortgage delayed, we had our car payments delayed. I did get 2 of those $20,000 PPP loans legitimately. So I got 2 of those. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it was a real, I was really scared that that was going to happen because, I mean, let's be honest, that fraud was not difficult to commit at all. So it's like, and to that point, there was a guy on Dread, which is basically the Reddit of the dark web. He was on Dread and he said, hey, he said, if you're a fraudster and you've not become rich through the pandemic, you are a poor fraudster. And I sat there and I read that and I was like, yeah, you're right. You are, because you've got the unemployment, you've got PPP, you've got EIDL, you've got all these things that you could have, that they were giving money away. And it's just unfortunate that because of the pandemic, the CARES Act got rid of some of the controls in place. They put these stimulus programs in with no security, and then they were 6 months trying to implement security. And then when they did it piecemeal and kind of went the wrong way with it. So I'm glad that you were there and you started to flag a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's because I spoke to bankers. I really did. I spoke to several bankers that they told me that they were sure that PPP loans were coming through and they were fraudulent, but they weren't too worried about it because it wasn't their money.
All right, that's exactly the point I want to hit on. And so this is a question for you, Eveline. And I commend you for taking a position. What would you say to those institutions that might be listening, that might be sharing the perspective that Brent just referenced, that it's not our money?
Well, I will say this first, okay, as from an institution and regulatory, right? As long as that ACH, the account number matches the account number matches, really there's no risk to the institution. There's no loss, there's no risk, right? So with that being said, if you're getting thousands of, your ACH file has thousands of deposits coming in, that's a lot to kind of filter, which is where ToolCASE came into play with us, with the Cash App transactions. So if you don't have the right tools in place, you're not going to necessarily catch it unless you have someone from the front line that says, hey, this person normally doesn't have this kind of money, but they're here to do a large withdrawal, right? And then you have to have upper management support, and you really have to care. You have to have the passion to fight fraud, right? At the end of the day, someone's going to have to pay this money back, and I'm sitting here working, so I'm probably one of those people, right?
Yeah, you are.
So,
you are.
And I think there's more to it. I would argue that if your members, in your case, are willing to commit this type of fraud, somebody else's money and loss, but they're willing to commit the fraud, they're a member of your institution. If they're successful in committing that fraud, maybe that's their first attempt, I think it set a precedent with them in how they respect or don't respect your organization, and may attempt fraud on you guys, right?
right.
Brett, your thought on the criminal mindset and them learning on the backs of that institution, even though they're not taking the losses.
Sure. So let me go back to this Telegram thing, all right? Because Telegram had a lot of people bragging about stealing a lot of money through unemployment fraud and PPP. Had a lot of people doing that, all right? One of the institutions, I won't say the name, but it was a color and then associated with a plant, all right? So they were getting PPP loans through that. They were going through very easily. So basically what happens is you get the entry point through the PPP. You're not worried about it. Hey, it's not my money. I'm not worried about it. The government will handle that later. Well, guess what? They're already in your system. The fraudster's there. They know that you don't care at that point, or maybe your security's not good enough. They don't worry about that, but they know they're in your system. So they're going to start looking at other things that they could do. Is it possible to do synthetic fraud through there? Is it possible to open up new accounts? Can I open up a checking account there? Can I do any number of things? I think that once you allow a criminal in your system, that the criminal at that point is going to see other ways, or try to determine other ways they can profit with that system, especially a bank. Because let's be honest, I mean, it's difficult. It is difficult to set up an account and have the, age the account out, everything else, and actually use it for laundering. It gets difficult to do that. You have to kind of know what you're doing. So if you find a bank where it's easy to do that, yeah, you tend to use the hell out of it as much as you possibly can. And that, I think that's the issue with these institutions that these fraudsters were talking about that were so easy to hit. You got the entry there. Where else can we exploit?
Yeah, I got to believe, Eveline, that Launch is certainly grateful that you've taken that position, but I know that it must make your job easier knowing that you have the support from management to take this type of stuff head on. Shows great representation of the institution, but I think the bigger message is to your members or prospective members that this isn't going to happen at Launch. Launch isn't going to tolerate this type of activity. So you take that target right off your back, and I would think the criminal empire starts to identify those that are weak and exposing themselves with weakness and vulnerability versus those that are taking a tough position.
For some reason, I disconnected you there for a second, though. I will say, as Brett was saying, if you let them in one time, they just continue to hit your institution. Now it's fair game.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You've got, so some of these criminal networks, take a Telegram channel. So AIO Crime over there has about 18,000 members. 18,000 members on a Telegram channel. And so one of them finds out that a financial institution, hey man, I got a PPP loan for 20K within 4 days. Nobody asked any questions. It went through just great. So what happens? Everybody else is like, let's hit that. So everybody gets the PPP loan through there. Then they're sitting there going, well, it was really easy. It was really easy to get that loan through that bank. I wonder if I could actually set up an account at that bank, maybe launder some money through it later on. And that is exactly the way this thing goes. You find an easy target, and then you start testing other areas of that target is what you do. Can I get a loan? Synthetic fraud is going to come back. I mean, it didn't really go away. It took a brief hiatus because everyone was becoming rich on PPP and unemployment, but it's coming back. There was a white paper before the pandemic hit from the federal government that said, hey, this is not going anywhere anytime soon. So fraudsters need that ability to hit financial institutions with synthetic profiles. So that's coming back, and they're looking for targets. And I'm sure, I know as a matter of fact, that if it was easy enough to hit you on stimulus, they're going to try it with synthetic as well.
Eveline, you had mentioned, early on that, during COVID, you're seeing new fraud, and of course we're still challenged with the same fraud that we've been dealing with for over a decade. I just saw a statistic again this morning that, from a fraud standpoint, from a unit perspective, credit card, debit card still leading, wire, ACH probably bigger numbers, but this is old stuff, right? We're still dealing with these. One of the other COVID related fraud incidents that we experienced, and I think you were highly involved in, was the unemployment fraud. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that piece?
Yes. So the unemployment fraud came about with so everybody that works in this field has, if you work in a financial institution, you work in fraud, you have accounts that you monitor daily because they're your problem children, right? So I happened to check one of my problem children accounts, and noticed that the individual had received 5 unemployment payments from the state of Washington, 5 different names, right? They're ACH files again. So again, you know, we're in compliance because as long as the account number matches, there is no name match that has to match. So I see, understanding that you have to allow things to happen in order to have a crime that looks like a crime was committed, right? So, but the individual happened to be at a branch wanting to wire the money out. So
Okay.
you allow that to happen. You allow part of it to happen, correct? So I did what I needed to do to protect the institution, and then I reached out to my contact with Secret Service, and I said, hey, have you heard anything about the unemployment state of Washington? You know, have you heard anything? Are you seeing anything? Has anybody reported it? And he goes, no, what are you talking about? It was like 9:30 at night. I get a text message. He goes, hey, can you talk? So I answer the phone. He goes, my phone has not stopped ringing. He sent it out to FinCEN, sent it out to CrimeDex, and sent it out to a few other partners, right, that they work with. He goes, it's global. He goes, this is huge. And I said, what? And that's where it was discovered. So
Wow.
again, you know, they're ACH. So unless you're looking for something, we wouldn't have found it till months later. And I guess at the time that they found it, my understanding is that state of Washington knew that they had an issue, but thought that they had it under wraps, when in reality, they really hadn't, you know.
Right.
And quite a bit of money there that came in, and I was able to stop, you know, from it going out of our institution. We were able to send it back. And then at times I was able to stop what the portions that the individual didn't use, that the member didn't use, and Secret Service paid them a visit and seized the money then. You know, they released the money to the Secret Service. So again, it's looking for things, you know, you have to want to look for it, but it's out there. I mean, the unemployment for our institution and the size, from the time that it started last year, I think we stopped 1.4 million. You know, that's a lot of money when you think of our institution size that was fraudulent unemployment that belonged to other people.
So
You know,
let me
so
ask you,
here,
on the
sure.
unemployment that you stopped, was it on, when they had it deposited, were the accounts brand new or were the accounts
No,
existing accounts?
no, they were existing accounts. Some of them were long-term existing accounts. Some of them were caught up in romance scams.
Sure.
Some of them were caught up in the, you know, looking for a job, you applied for a job, you got the deposit.
Right.
To me, I have a hard time believing that people don't see that old saying, if it's too good to be true, it's not good, right?
Right.
So that's hard to balance for me, because it's like, how could you not see that you received $25,000 worth of money that's not yours for
I agree.
nothing,
And
you know?
that's, I was talking to a gentleman from, he was head of fraud in one of the states, and this is about 3 days ago. And he was talking, we were talking about the difference between traditional criminals and what I like to call the opportunists. So, you know, last year we had roughly 38 million Americans put out of work. A lot of people worried about paying their bills. You know, how are we going to make the house payment? How are we make the car payments? I was one of those people. And I'm sure, matter of fact, I know it. I know there's a percentage of those people that they adopted that criminal mindset of, I'm going to do whatever I need to do it. You know, if that's refund fraud, if that's unemployment fraud, if that's a fraudulent PPP. So that's why I was asking about the accounts, because, you know, it seems to me that the traditional criminals, the real cyber criminals that are out there, they know not to have it deposited to their own bank account. You know, but the opportunists, the people who read about Washington State and Nigerians stealing $1 billion, they don't really understand that dynamic of laundering money. That's where you're going to get caught. That's where you're going to go to prison. You know, you can go out and get that PPP loan and buy that Maserati, Yugo of supercars, but you're not going to get to keep it very long. And that's, so do you think a lot of the people, and I noticed you said romance scams, do you think that, I mean, what percentage do you think were just the opportunists that you saw on the existing accounts?
You know, you're asking someone that's been on this side of the house working in an institution. At some point, you kind of go, you can only play dumb so long, right?
Yeah.
I had an individual that actually banked at the other institution I was with that started over here that I caught doing the same thing she was doing over there. And when I talk to these individuals, I'm very blunt. So I don't sugarcoat things. I explain to them what's going on and what they're doing and how they're caught up in it, whether they're a willing participant, whether they were caught. So you kind of go, okay, so maybe she was caught up in a romance scam, right? And except after 2 years of me being gone from that institution, that's no longer a victim. I'm sorry. Now you're a willing participant.
Right.
And when you can identify the resources I use, you can identify she's opened accounts at 18 other institutions, and you ask her, well, what did you do with all of these bank accounts? And she's telling you, well, I invest money. And I go, how many times do I have to tell you? Because she goes, oh, I remember you. So it's not that she, so I don't know. To be honest with you, Brett, I don't know, because it's not just the women too, right? I saw some men fall into that romance scam thing, and you would tell them you're blunt. I mean, you have to be blunt, because if you're going to allow the account to be open, you got to tell them how it is. And I do. And they continue to fall into it. Well, nobody's that much in love. I'm sorry, And like I say, hey, I have a boyfriend. He doesn't just, hand me the money like that. And he didn't just deposit thousands of dollars in my account. If he did, heck, But at some point, you're no longer a victim, right? You're a willing participant. So.
Yeah, and that's excuse my language, that's a hell of a conversation. When you think about it, that line, because you're right, there's a line where you cross from being a victim to being a willing participant in that crime.
Correct.
There's a line. And you would, I'm sorry, but it's a choice too, right? I mean, it's a choice, because all crime is a choice. It has to be an active choice to commit crime. So at some point, that victim actively chooses to then engage in crime. And it's I don't know what to say about that. I don't. It amazes me, because I've talked to a lot of romance scam victims. Talked to a lot of victims overall the past few years, and I've talked to some that have crossed that line. I have, and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there too. They don't really understand that they chose to do that. They talk about being victimized, but then they don't really accept that they then chose to victimize others after that. And I'm not sure how you fix that. I'm really not.
Well, and here's where I think when I took this position, right, I said, well, hey, if I was voluntold to do this, I'm going to do what I can to learn everything that I can and meet the contacts that I have. So that's where, for a fraud investigator in a financial institution, you have to have the contacts. So I start calling other institutions, because the other thing is they made it so hard for financial institutions to share information amongst each others, right? That really it's horrible. But you meet these contacts with these conferences we were going to, and you're able to pick up the phone and say, hey, so I have this person, it's a mutual, or they received money from your institution. And I had a case with $500,000 that came in when I was at the prior institution I was with. $500,000 came in. Now it was a cashier's check, right? It was guaranteed funds because the institution that issued that, I know, would have not issued a $500,000 cashier's check if it was not guaranteed funds.
Right.
But based on the individual that was in front of me, knowing what they were doing, someone over here was scammed big time, right? So you got to kind of back trail to that transaction. And that's where you have to know, that's where working in all facets of banking helps you, because you understand where the money came in and how they were able to get that money released and a $500,000 cashier's check, right? So fraud is just, but at some point with some of the cases I have, I don't know that they're victims anymore. To me, they've crossed that line and you've chosen to commit the crime.
Yeah, because I would agree. If you're a money mule, you've got to make the choice to do that.
Yeah, exactly,
You got to
exactly.
make the choice to do it.
But then I was gonna tell you.
Let me ask you, because Sam brought this up at the beginning of our conversation. He said, you know, that basically the criminals are the ones that are setting the pace. You know, and we just kind of react. I'm able to say we these days. I'm kind of proud of that. So, but you know, we just kind of react what the criminals do, that pace that's set. And if you think about it, my thought pattern on that is, well, the reason they're able to set the pace is something that you just alluded to. Criminals share information. They talk freely amongst one another. There are no privacy concerns, no regulations in place, nothing like that. They share and exchange information openly. The good guys, there are privacy concerns, there are regulations, there is HIPAA, GDPR, and everything else. And there's a competitive edge as well, but they don't share information. And I think that's a lot of our problem is that inability or just the choice not to share information with each other.
Well, it's not just sharing. I think it's the acceptance that fraud and loss need to be a business priority for the organization. And that's one of the questions I have for you, Eveline. You know, what's your position or your advice to a financial institution that claims they don't have the resources necessary to devote themselves to fraud?
If you can't find the resources necessary to devote to fraud, expect to lose more money than what it would cost to put the resources in place, right? Because I can tell you what we use for our monitoring system, it paid itself back in the 2 months, in 2 months, right? So if it's doing that, then what's the big, you know, what's your big concern? I mean, if you're willing, and this is what I hear a lot, and for some people, and this is probably the biggest thing I've had to learn to deal with, is when they say, well, it's the cost of doing business. Well, that cost of doing business, at some point, when do you start seeing your numbers kind of go, you know, because it's a known fact that credit unions are member-based. And when you're member-based and you're looking to serve your member, it's not like you do. The fraudsters know you can get away with more at a credit union than you can at a commercial bank, right?
Absolutely.
So they know that. I mean, I see things every day and I'm thinking, oh my God, these people are, and they just get smarter, right? But I'm going to tell you, late at night when I'm sitting on the couch when we're watching television, I'm on Facebook Marketplace. Do you know that they're even out there telling you how to do the PPP loans? Or they were, right? Because PPP loans, but I foresee that coming back into play again. They were out there talking about, hey, have you applied for the PPP loan? Go through this institution. And I'm like, oh my God.
Well, there's a marketing message that you don't want to be referenced in.
You don't want to be on that list. You don't want to be talked about on Dread, on Telegram, anything else that, hey, this is where you need to go to get these loans. You don't want to be taught. You're right. On Facebook, there were these groups on Facebook that walked you through how to do EIDL, guaranteed you that $10,000 every day, all day, if you wanted it. It's the same thing with unemployment, PPP, everything else. It was all there, And you mentioned it a second ago that, oh, it's the cost of doing business. No, it's not. It's not. If you look at the crime that's going on right now, you look at, let's just say the names. You look at Colonial Pipeline. You look at Kaseya. You look at the SolarWinds. If they would have taken the proper approach and do what they needed to do, that would have been far cheaper than fixing it after the attack. Far cheaper. But no, that didn't happen. They had that mindset that you just mentioned. Well, that's the cost of doing business. No, no, it's not. It's not.
Well, you guys.
Go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just going to say, you know, you spoke about it earlier when you were saying with the PPP loan, somebody's paying that back. So if it's federal government paying, you know, that's taking a hit, taxpayers are paying it back. But if you're a financial institution and you're not seeing the need to dedicate time, effort, money, and resources to combating fraud, as you said, you plan on losing more money. The argument about, or the position about it's a cost of doing business, I think is often lost on the other side of the house, because those financial institutions are competing for market share. They're competing for customers. And how do you appeal to a customer? How do you appeal to a member, to come to an organization? Oftentimes you're leading with products like loans and credit cards.
Mhm.
And you have to do so with low interest rates, which is a cost of doing business. So
Mhm.
it's going to affect your margins. If you're trying to give them more rewards on those products and services, there's a cost to doing business. So it's connecting those two dots, on the and where the investment and you, like you said, I'm really impressed with those numbers. I've heard it from others that you got a full ROI in 90 days. And I think it's pretty remarkable. So, for me, it sounds like a weak argument that we don't have the dedication to those resources, the ability to dedicate time, resources to that problem, or we don't think that the problem's big enough. Probably not big enough because you don't know what you don't know. I mean,
That's
Right.
have you seen that?
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. So, and not only that, so COVID changed a lot of ways of how the criminal does their thing now, right? So actually putting a bad check through, that's just for your small local 18-year-olds getting caught up in a little, bad check kind of thing, and then the occasional wrap your car scam and you deposit the check. But actually a check is harder to come through, to kind of it's harder to put through a bad check, than it is the PPP loans, the applying for a web loan, for a credit card. I mean, identity theft out there, it's rampant. I can tell you what we're seeing, Now, you also have to have the support of your executive management, right? They have to support their fraud department. And we have that here. So I'm involved in all facets. So I get to see all of these things that, and it's, hey, something doesn't look right. Can you call me? And then it's the ongoing training. So it's not only your fraud department, it's you have to have that ongoing training with the staff at the front line, because if they're telling you that what's the cost of doing business, you may not realize how much it's really costing you, because a lot of institutions also have that 6 months no interest, 6 months no payment for 6 months, or 0% interest on this credit card. By the time you realize that auto loan is fraud, because 6 months later is when that first payment's due, well, you don't know where that car is at. I hate to tell you, but that car is long gone and you may not find it.
I mean, you're right. You're right. And I like what you said there is, yeah, I've been kind of apathetic the past few weeks. Even apathetic, I'm still this eternal optimist, but I've been kind of apathetic because, you look at these big frauds. You look at the stimulus fraud. You look at ransomware attacks. You look at the merchants are being hit with this return fraud.
Mm-hmm.
You look at all these frauds that are going around, and it occurs to me that there's a 3-syllable word that would have fixed all of that. And it's listening. If you would have listened to the people who were telling you that this is coming and this is how you stop it, it would have never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yet time and again, we see that the people that were making the choices were not listening properly. And I think we have to get to that point where we listen to people who know what they're talking about. And you also you're this entire conversation, you've said it without saying it. The most important thing is information. Looking at the data, looking at everything that's coming across, being able to identify these things that are going wrong, and the collaboration that you've got. You were able to reach out to people that you know at other institutions and say, hey, what about this? Are you able to reach out to the Secret Service and say, hey, have you looked at this? And that's, we have to collaborate. We have to look at all the data that's coming through, everything else. And if we don't, I'm telling you, if we don't, it's going to be a really, really bad day for
Well,
anybody that's on the
we've talked
side.
about it before, Brett, that you own the data. It's there.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
if you want to educate yourself, take a look at the data. You're going to find the incidents. It's in the data. Now you're going to need tools and applications that are going to permit you to get in there and look at it. But but the evidence is there. And you know, Eveline, you're discovering it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So when you see this kind of thing, how often, I'm just curious, how involved are you with upper management in providing them the feedback on what you're doing from a departmental standpoint? Or are you at a place now with them where, you know, they've already entrusted you with that and they know it's there? Or is it something you're communicating with them on a regular basis?
So, let's see, when I came on board, I think when I came on board, they trusted me. They had heard of me, from somebody, you know, from an external auditor. They had heard about me. So I think someone else had already kind of set the ground for me that, hey, this is what you need. This is the person you need in your fraud department to fix your issues, right? To fix whatever you're coming up with. And at that time, I think they were going to start doing external transfers at that time. So fast forward, I come on board with them. And the one thing I noticed was that the system they were using to identify fraud was a 24-hour delay, right? So, which, you know,
Brett, is that enough time? 24 hours?
listen, the fraudster, Brett, you know, the fraudster is sitting outside an ATM machine when they're doing the deposit. I mean, it doesn't just, you know, so, but I'm going to tell you, they listened to me and I said, look, this is what we need. We need real-time monitoring. So they've supported me there. We implemented real-time monitoring. And I think that the numbers that they see to them may be a little surprising, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there's no cases to be worked, because once you're stopping it, then the determination comes, because we went from federal, by the way, Sam, to just state chartered. So now we're just launch credit union. We're not launch federal anymore. So now we made the decision, hey, if you're coming on board, you're our member and you're going to commit the crime, knowingly deposit a check that you received and it's fraudulent, right? For example, we're just going to close you out, right?
Okay.
Where being a federal credit union, you couldn't just close out you could limit the membership, you couldn't close it out, right? So they found other ways to commit crimes. So once we implemented the real-time monitoring, and they started seeing these numbers and the losses, I mean, it was like the numbers were going up, the losses were going down, right? The numbers, the savings, you know, so it was one of those, they were going, okay. So really, I report to them just so they know, and then monthly we report to the board. Okay. But it's just important for them to know, hey, so yes, I'm sitting at home working, but this is what I've done, you know.
If you don't have real-time data,
it's just not going to work.
If in today's world, if you don't have real-time data, because criminals do have real-time data and they share it. Right. If you don't have real-time data, you are completely useless. You're working blind. Yeah. And you've got predators out there. It's like you're in a forest. You can't see anything at all, but all the predators see you all the time. So I mean, you have to have real-time data. You have to.
I mean, you think about tool cases. Let's say within 3 minutes we get the alert, and we're looking at the check. We're trying to determine, but you know, because of the regulation, it releases 225. Well, that 225 is gone within 3 minutes if they're good, right? If the criminal is good enough and if they think about it. Some of them are sitting at the ATM going, hey, I'm going to deposit it, releases 225, and I'm pulling that 225 immediately. So
it's an easy 225.
When you think of, exactly. So real time is 3 minutes and we're getting it and we're saving a lot of money. So what was 24 hours later doing?
Yeah.
You know? So
yeah, I mean, you're wide open. You're wide open.
Yeah.
If you have to wait 24 hours, you are wide open, and the amount of crime that can happen, the way you're going to be victimized, I can't even imagine. I mean, it's bad. It's bad.
Right.
It's a bad day.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, the other thing I find is you have to be in the position and you have to have a passion for it. Because I could sit here on a slow day and I start just kind of looking through things, and you can find the smallest of things that leads into something big, right? And that's where the money laundering comes into, or things that are just kind of falling under the radar, you know? So not only does a financial institution have to have the resources of that, you know, real-time monitoring, I think you have to have individuals in place too that care about what they're doing, have a passion for it, and you have to have you want to protect the institution.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
And you said just a few minutes ago, you're training everyone, you're
Mhm.
listening to everyone, because
Right.
that listening, that the ability to listen, that makes a lot of difference. It really does.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're listening to everyone at the institution, because everyone has a viewpoint. Everyone might, that's someone out there may have an insight that you've never heard before, and just taking the time to get that insight from them may make a world of difference at the end of the day. And
Mhm.
that's what we have to do. We have to this idea, and I've worked with companies, I've spoken with companies, and I've hammered companies that their fraud management team. Some of them are like, we don't need the input from anybody else, and meanwhile they're getting eaten alive. But I think the way you guys are doing business over there, I think it's great. That
Yeah.
training, that listening, real time data, everything else, I think it's outstanding. I truly do.
Yeah.
I heard some great things. I want to be able to highlight for the listeners in the event that they're not taking notes. Brett, I heard you talk about the importance of being able to listen several times, and how important that is. Listening from a leadership perspective to your staff, those folks. It's evident in what Evelyn's doing, what she brought to the organization, or in organizations, I should say. The listening piece is critical. I heard you also say that you need to look at the data, that the data is there, that it's important that you take a look at the data. That it'll be evident that that's where you're going to find the fraud. You'll find the evidence and the business case you need to pursue and devote and dedicate time and resources to combating it. And Evelyn, I heard a number of things from you that I think the listeners, especially if they're financial institutions out there, that are critical. One is that, obviously you need the tools. You want the real-time data streaming capability, the analytics, and the AI to assist. You spoke about the support of leadership in your executive team. I think that's a great message. I know sometimes that's hard to raise that, but I think as in your case, if you're looking at the data, you're able to bring that evidence to leadership. Eyes on, they're clearly starting to respect. And the other piece that is obviously evident, and I've known you for some time now. I remember when you made that transition into the role, and it's clear that passion is irreplaceable in this piece. You definitely have a passion for what you're doing, and that passion is represented in the performance that you bring to the organization. On that, I want to just ask your opinion or your feedback on how do you think you evoke that passion, or how can you help breed that passion among staff that you have? If it's something that maybe is innate in the individual but not exercised in the individual, is there a methodology? Because we talked about, sometimes fraud's not the sexiest component of the institution, right?
Right.
There are other departments that are getting a lot more attention. So is there something you do that helps to elevate that passion or excitement in your department?
I think it's engagement. You have to have that engagement. You have to, even though it's an ugly topic, right? It's a good topic to have conversations about. But anytime a branch calls me, and time is of essence sometimes on some of these crimes, and you have to move fast. You have to get the account number. You have to start locking things down. And so one thing I tell them is, and I start kind of pushing for quick information like that, I call them back and I go, hey, I'm really sorry that, but if I don't get the information quick enough, the money, you can see the money moving, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. The money moves. So I think it's letting them listen to the conversation, letting them see how it was handled and what the outcome was, right? And when they see the outcome, and then I have a one-on-one conversation with them, because then once the victim leaves, the member leaves, I call that person back and I go, hey, I'm really sorry, that things were moving fast. It may have sounded like I was abrupt. That wasn't my intention. It's just that fraud is something that you have to attack quickly, and you have to lock things down. You have to secure things quick. So I think I also do branch training. I visit all the branches some on a quarterly basis, some on biannual. It's just, you have to have that one-on-one with them. You have to put that face in front of them, because talking to them over the phone, I'm only 5 feet tall, but sometimes it comes across like I'm 8 feet tall, and I've had people say, you sure are small in comparison to what you look like in person, and when you build that trust with the branches and people, they call you for everything. I went to a leadership class yesterday, and it was really neat to hear some of the branch personnel say, man, every time we call you, you're like right there. We call you after 5 o'clock and you answer your phone. Again, you have to have the passion, you have to want to help, and you want to share what you're doing for the institution. Because to me, I work here, and if I can't give them 150%, I don't want to work here. Right. So you have to save them money. You're saving the institution money. You're saving our members from further, hardship down the road. Because when there's fraud on your account, it's a domino effect. Your FP, your light bill starts kicking out. Your mortgage may kick out. So it's a domino effect on a lot of things. So it's not just one thing; it's a lot. Brett, you talked about the I call it CPNs. The consumer protection numbers and those loans and stuff. The synthetic fraud.
Right. So
we started seeing some identity theft fraud here in the last week or two with our web loans, and I've enjoyed, one, identifying them, and two, just sharing it with the staff that reviews those loans, how easy it was to identify them. How easy it was just to look at it, and they're like, how did you know? And I go, there's just some key indicators, without saying them on here, right, that they're easy to identify.
Absolutely.
People will become a sponge if you are willing to understand where they come from, where they have a customer or a member sitting in front of them, and they have that balance act. Where for me, I do have a member service balancing act too, but I'm also here to protect the institution. So my conversations may not always be the best. But
I think you're great. I do. I think you're absolutely great. And you brought up something just then. It's easy once you look at it. It's easy once you listen to the data. As Sam said, you own all the data. Why aren't you looking at it? Because if you look at it properly, if you know what you're looking at, it'll tell you everything. It'll tell you everything you need to know. It'll identify not only that criminal, but every instant of that criminal. And because most of these criminals operate the same way, guess what? It's going to identify a whole host of those guys.
Yeah.
And they're either going to go someplace else, or they're going to try to adapt. And I'm going to tell you the way that actually works. They don't try to adapt at your institution. They just find an institution that's still easy to hit, and they move on down the road. So it becomes this idea, you've got to look at the data. And I think you guys, I really do. I think you're doing an outstanding job, Eveline. I truly do.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But I agree with you. Once you kind of put your wall up where they can't penetrate that wall with the fraudster can't, the message gets out there.
Yeah.
And they'll continue to try. Another group of them, of individual, fraudsters will try again later, or whatever. But word gets out there. Word travels fast.
Well, I think word's out. At 5 feet tall, she's a giant in the industry.
I'll tell you a story on that. No, I'll tell you a story. I had a case with adult exploitation, and the police officer is telling me, well, I can't arrest her. And I said, oh, no, you will arrest her, because I'm telling you, this is why you're going to arrest her. And we kept going back and forth. And I said, oh, no, I'm calling. And I started making phone calls. I said, and don't leave do not leave. I'm showing up. And I show up there, and he's like 6'5". And I walk in, and the look on his face was priceless. And I still hear about it, because that branch manager now works with me over here at this institution. She goes, I'll never forget the day you walked in. He looked at you, and he said, you look like and your mouth is as big as I don't know. But they took the person away. I mean, it was like you have to understand how you also have to know a little bit about everything. You have to understand how the law works. You have to understand what can and can't be prosecuted. You have to understand how to protect the credit union, your financial institution, how you can and can't share information with law enforcement, what protects you when sharing information. I always say, listen, there's always one way or another to get the job done. Figure it out. But until you figure that out, you're always going to be afraid to share that information, and your institution is going to continue to suffer big losses.
Right. I agree.
Brett, we're both glad to have her on this side, right?
She's great, right?
Yeah. We don't want her on the other side.
I mean, I'm sure there's a whole host of criminals that don't like her.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of them. Listen, I've never been cussed out so much in my life like I have in the last year and a half. I thought, geez.
It's got to feel good though, right? When you get cussed out like that, it's got to feel good because you're doing the right thing at that point.
To be honest with you, it was just like, hey, you know what? You weren't successful. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you weren't able to take money that belonged to somebody else. Right. There's individuals out there that were waiting for this unemployment money and that didn't get it, so individuals here that were receiving an unemployment from 3 different states. And I'm thinking, well, how does that happen?
And those that were filed upon and then had to deal with, the risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Eveline Tenczar, thank you very much for being a guest today. There's so much great information that has been shared for listeners. If some of our listeners wanted to reach out to you at launch, is there a general way to reach you in collaboration or looking for information?
Yeah, they can always call me. I'm always open to sharing what I do, and I like having those conversations. They can always call me at the office. I can share that number,
And it's for folks that are looking for a organization with superior fraud analytic capability and a very passionate and dedicated BSA and fraud resource. Launchcu.com. Am I correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
All right. I know if you're looking for a secured, safe, and an aggressive institution, it sounds like you're the one. My co-host and buddy, Brett Johnson, a real pleasure to be able to get back together with you. Look forward to more dialogue. I'm glad you two got a chance to get together and collaborate today.
She's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh, it was great, Brett. I was amazed when I met you in Colorado. I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to have like a whole day to chat with this guy just to see how he did all this.
I think, Brett, I know you do consulting work. If Launch is looking for support, would you be available to go down and chat with them?
I absolutely would. I would. I would love to come in and talk to you guys. Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I'll touch base with you. We'll see what we can arrange. Okay.
Well, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for joining us today, Eveline.
Thank you for having me.
And for being a dedicated client, ToolCASE. We honor the relationship. You guys have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining this episode of FraudCAST.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Learn more about the ToolCASE suite of real-time AI products and how to protect your institution from fraud today.